the Waterfall of the Seas. When Eric said this, his men looked at each other in disbelief. Has our leader gone mad? They asked. But Eric spoke again. Since we cannot row against the sea, let us go wherever it takes us. But some of his men fell on their knees and begged him to let them stay where they were. Who knows, they said. Somebody may rescue us before we die. No, said Eric, I will not stay here tied to this rock that sticks up out of the sea like a dragon's tooth a moment longer. Besides, I'd like to see the edge of the world so I can tell my wife about it when I get home. And some of his men fell on their faces. They were so terrified. Put us out on the rock that sticks out of the sea like a dragon's tooth, they cried. We would rather take our chance there, such as it is, than go to the edge of the world. But Eric only laughed out loud. Don't worry, he said. You can shiver where you are on your own benches, for I plan to take a look at the edge of the world alone and then return to tell you all about it. So saying, he launched the small rowing boat, fastening its stern to the prow of Golden Dragon by a long, long rope. Then he jumped in and turned to wave goodbye. But as he did so, Sven the Strong jumped down beside him. I cannot let you go all alone to see such a wonderful sight as the edge of the world. I'll come with you and be your witness, said Sven the Strong. And so the sea carried the little boat with Eric and Sven the Strong towards the edge of the world. Take care the rope doesn't break, shouted Thorkild, but they could not hear a word, for the roaring of the water and the rushing of the sea was so loud in their ears. The ocean current pulled the boat this way and that way, and Sven sat in front, peering through the spray, while Eric slowly paid out the rope that held them back. The spray and the mist are so thick, called out Sven the Strong, that I shall not be able to tell when we reach the edge of the world. But Eric kept on paying out the line, and the roaring got louder and louder, and the little boat pulled at its rope harder and harder, and they knew that they must be getting closer and closer to the edge of the world. Then suddenly they came through the spray and the mist, and the most amazing sight greeted their eyes. There was the sea stretching out on either side of them, but suddenly plunging vertically downwards like a vast waterfall that stretched from one horizon to the other. In front of them the sky stretched on down and down below them until it merged into blackness, and there they saw stars at their feet, and below the stars nothing but a blackness that never ended. Eric paid out a little more rope, and the little boat strained against the headlong waters and inched its nose over the edge. Sven the Strong leaned over the prow and peered down. What do you see? Cried Eric, but Sven the Strong did not reply. He pulled himself back into the boat and turned to Eric, and he was as white as a sheet. Hold the rope, shouted Eric. I want to see for myself. But Sven the Strong stopped him. Don't, he said. What good can it do? But I must look now we've come so far, shouted Eric above the thundering waters. When I looked over, I felt my strength draining away from me, replied Sven the Strong. It was being sucked down over that fearful edge as fast as these waters plunge into the dark. Take the rope, cried Eric. I must look for myself. And he thrust the rope into Sven's hands and leaned over the prow and peered down over the edge of the world. There was the void, nothing but blackness below them, and oceans plunging straight down into it until they were lost to sight. And just as Sven had said, Eric too felt his strength draining away, tumbling with the pell-mell sea into the abyss. Eric's heart began to pound, and his mind began to reel. Nothing, he thought, could be so immense, so deep and so empty. Just then Sven the Strong gave a cry. My strength has gone, he shouted. I cannot hold on. And as he said the words, the rope slipped through his hands, and the little rowing boat with the two men in it shot out into the black abyss, thrown by the force of the water. Eric gripped the sides with all his might, and Sven clung on for dear life, but the oars flew up and then plummeted down, 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 slowly down into the blackness below, and were gone forever. And Eric watched them, fascinated, as if he were more concerned for their fate than for his own. But at that moment the boat itself began to fall, and the two men clung on desperately. Then with a wrench it reached the end of the rope that Eric had tied to the stern, and his knot held, and the stern post creaked, but that too held, and the rope tore, and many strands broke loose and ravelled up under the strain, but that too held, and the boat fell back and dangled them over the abyss with the wall of falling ocean crashing down upon it, and the two men, scarcely able to breathe, unable to see, and almost battered senseless. Then quite suddenly all went quiet. Eric shook the water from his face and opened his eyes. It was dark, and yet behind the wall of water continued to fall. Then gently he nudged Sven the Strong and said, "See what has happened to us." "Where are we?" cried Sven. "Don't you see what happened?" cried Eric. "We've gone right through the Waterfall of Seas and have come out of the other side. We are under the lip of the edge of the world." By the time their eyes were becoming accustomed to the dark, and they could see that they were in a cave that ran like a tunnel in both directions, as far as they could see, with the falling water making one wall. "Look," said Eric to Sven the Strong. "Do you see what I see?" And Sven the Strong looked. "Do you see? There, inside is a pool," cried Eric. And Sven looked, and then he could see that the cavern opened up behind them, and there within it was a great lake. "Now," said Eric, "we have our way before us." "I don't understand," replied Sven the Strong. "I mean," said Eric, "that we must set Golden Dragon afloat upon that lake. For since we can go neither backwards nor forwards in the world above, we shall explore the underworld here. Who knows what we may find, or where this water will lead us?" Sven the Strong went silent for a moment. Then he closed his eyes and shook his head and said, "We can't. "We can't do anything else," replied Eric. "But how can we get back to Golden Dragon?" asked Sven the Strong. "We must climb back up the rope over the edge of the world." Part 3. The Dragon's Tooth. Sven the Strong felt sick in the pit of his stomach, for he dreaded to look again into the black abyss that lay beyond the edge of the world. But he said to Eric, "Let me try first." And without more words, he took hold of the rope that still ran from the rowing boat back up through the Waterfall of the Seas to Golden Dragon. But Eric pulled him back. Then he tied another line around Sven's waist and held the other end himself. "Good luck, Sven," said Eric. So Sven the Strong began to climb the ravelling rope back up over the edge of the world. But once he was back in the pounding waterfall, he could not see and he could not breathe, and the weight of the water falling upon him was more than any man could bear, and his hands began to slip and his lungs filled with water, so that he could not even shout as suddenly he fell back down, and Eric only just saw his body hurtle past in the deluge, and only just had time to brace himself before the rope went taut, and he too felt the force of the Waterfall of Seas dragging him down. Eric got a foothold behind a ledge of rock and pulled and strained with all his might, until at last he pulled the limp body of Sven the Strong out of the pitching water. At first he thought his comrade was dead, but shortly Sven moaned and stirred and opened his eyes. "If you could not climb up through the Waterfall of Seas and back over the edge of the world," said Eric, "no man could." "Then we shall never see our comrades nor Golden Dragon again," said Sven, and he put his head in his hands. But Eric said, "Shh," and he stood with his head on one side. "Do you hear what I hear?" Sven the Strong joined him, and he too listened. "What do you hear?" whispered Eric. "Nothing," said Sven, "except the breaking of the waves far, far away." "But that's it," cried Eric. "There are no waves down here." And at that moment he stopped in his tracks and pointed up at the roof of the cavern. And when Sven the Strong looked, he saw a narrow shaft going straight up through solid rock. At the very top a pinprick of light, and down the shaft came the distant sound of waves breaking on a rock. Then Sven the Strong lifted Eric to the cave's roof, and Eric put his back up against one side of the shaft and his feet against the other, and in this way began to climb the narrow shaft towards the pinprick of light. As he got higher and higher, he did not dare look below, for the shaft went straight down, and if he slipped he would surely be dashed to pieces on the rocks below. But he kept his eyes fixed on the point of light above him, which was getting bigger all the time. The shaft was smooth and straight and had neither foothold nor handhold, and once his foot slipped, and once he thought he was too exhausted and weak to carry on, but eventually he placed his hand into the hole of light and pulled himself out into the day. And then he could hardly believe his eyes, for he found himself gazing out from the very pinnacle of the very rock that stuck out of the sea like a dragon's tooth, to which Ragnar Forkbeard had tied their ship. and there was Golden Dragon herself, still pulling on the rope that secured her. "Of course," cried Eric, "a dragon's tooth is sharp and long, but it is also always hollow. The rock is indeed a true dragon's tooth." Then he waved to his men, and they could scarcely believe their eyes, but they wasted no time before they got him back on board. And Eric wasted no time before he told them what he and Sven the Strong had discovered. "But how are we to get Golden Dragon onto that lake beneath the sea?" asked Ragnar Forkbeard. "The same way that Sven the Strong and I got there," replied Eric. "We must take Golden Dragon herself over the edge of the world and through the Waterfall of Seas." As soon as Eric had said this, a great debate broke out. Some said it was impossible, while some said it was madness. Some said it might work, while some said it wouldn't. But at length Eric called them all to be quiet. "We have no choice," he said, and he began to organise the fearful task securing both prow and stern of Golden Dragon to the rock with all the rope they had. Then they laid the mast along her and threw the sail over it like a tent. "That may keep some of the water out," said Eric, "for if Golden Dragon were to fill up with water, I doubt whether these ropes could support her weight." Then, with many a fearful prayer to the gods of the sea and boats and men, they began to pay out the ropes that held Golden Dragon to the rock. "But remember," Eric shouted above the roaring waters, "do not look into the abyss. We shall need all our strength to hold on to our ship." And so Eric and his men let their ship Golden Dragon be dragged through the mist and spray until they came out of it and hung there on the edge of the world, and the waters raged and pulled at their ship, and the timbers creaked and the ropes sighed, and the men hung on to them with all their might. "We must look over the edge of the world," they murmured one to the other. "It would be a crime to come so far and not see such a wonderful thing." But even as they murmured, they heard Eric's voice. "Let go of the ropes!" And at his command, Golden Dragon shot out from the edge of the world, hurled by the force of the waters, and seemed to hang in mid-air over the great abyss, before the ropes went taut and the ship went crashing back into the wall of falling water. And there was not one man amongst them who then had time to so much as think of looking over the side and down into the abyss. As the ship hit the wall of water, there was a dreadful crack, which they all heard even above the deafening roar, and they all knew what it meant. One rope had snapped, Golden Dragon lurched, and the men were hurled to one end as the water ripped under the covering sail and smashed through the boat, sending oars and shields and provisions flying. And for a moment Golden Dragon seemed to dangle there in the full force of the deluge, and the men clung on for dear life, knowing neither where they were nor what was happening. And then suddenly the ship swung again, as if kicked by the water, and they were in darkness, and the noise abated, and they opened their eyes and found they were lying on their side in the caverns beneath the edge of the world, with Sven the Strong laughing at their frightened faces.